Hey everyone, and before we dive into today's episode, I just want to talk about something I know a lot of developers and studios have been struggling with, and that's identifying who their audience is and understanding them. See, even with a good idea of your game's audience, it often doesn't address players' deeper needs as individuals beyond their gaming behaviors. And because of this, even if we understand how to market games, we can still get stuck by trying to align, connect, and resonate with players. That's why I've put together a detailed audience insight report. It's an in depth look at your core audience, breaking down everything from their personal motivations to actionable communication strategies that align your game's themes with your audience's interests, helping you stand out by truly resonating with players. If you're tired of guessing who your audience is and need that deeper level of clarity and direction that most reports don't provide, then let's fix that. I'm offering a free consultation to go over your game's positioning and show how these custom insights can improve your chances with publishers and help you stand out with your audience. I have limited availability, so I suggest acting now if you don't want to wait. And either way, if you're interested, just head over to rengenmarketing.com and click on the market and audience reports in the navigation bar, or just check out the link in this episode's show notes. And as always, thanks so much for listening. Now, let's just get right back to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about how to resonate with your audience and get remarkable results. Now, this is a very special episode. I'm going to give you all the details in a moment, but what I decided to do for today is simply I gave a talk recently. I'll share more about what that talk was outside of obviously what the topic is, and we're going to dive deep so we can better understand our audience to resonate with them in this very special podcast, retake of a talk I gave just for you guys, for listeners, let's call it the audio episode. So sit back, relax, and let's get to the show and figure out how to resonate with your audience and get remarkable results right here on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, we're back. And again, as I said, this is a special episode. So, what is this? Well, some quick context here. Recently, I gave a talk at Indie Game Business. For those of you who aren't familiar, Indie Game Business does these, sessions, I think like quarterly or annually or to some extent. But anyways, they have these sessions. It's part of the Powell Group. If you might recall, about a few months ago, maybe I did an interview with Jay Powell of the Powell Group, and we talked about a lot of cool things around the publishing landscape. But in part, he did share, and mention about the indie game business sessions and whatnot. And what those typically are, it's a virtual conference where you can meet and connect with people in the industry, but also they have talks. And I was fortunate enough to be selected as one of the speakers where I got to talk about, how to resonate with your audience and get remarkable results. So I figured, hey, why not do an episode here? Yes, there are visual aids to go with this, but they're not necessary for the purpose of today. So that's my focus. If you do want to talk, if you do want to see the whole thing, how it was originally presented, I'd say check out Indie Game Business. They have a great server, Discord, or you can go to their YouTube channel. All that stuff's there if you want the visuals. Or you know what? Just, hey, reach out to me. I'll give you the slides. I don't care. Make them available for you. I think you can get it through Indie Game Business too, but they're there. But anyways, I figured why not create the special episode, really dialed in, because I think this is important context for all of you guys. So no need for an introduction or anything else. So we're just going to dive in, but I wanted to give you that context. But again, highly recommend you guys check out Indie Game Business. What they're doing in the Discord's great. A lots of other great speakers too at this past event. Highly recommend it. And I'm positive they're all, free to access on their YouTube channel, everything else. So check it out, please. That said, let's get into this discussion. And, first, I'm just going to lead in with this really big and important statement. And I'll be honest, it's a little bit bold, but here it goes. Players are not people. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, essentially, the impression that I'm getting from the industry as a whole is how we do things, how we, understand our audiences, our players, and everything. We're essentially reducing them down to their player characteristics. And what I mean is their, game styles, how they play, their behaviors, and what their interests are is only associated around games or game-related things. And the way I see it is we're just looking at players as players, but not as people. And this is becoming a problem because what it's doing is we're only getting a piece of this information that's really helpful in how we market our games to people out there. So, what we're going to do then is take this at a deeper level. We're going to address this problem. We're going to look at all sorts of different things and better understand why this is a problem and how do you address it. Because ultimately, what I want to do with this talk today is show you how you can connect and resonate with players, but on a deeper level. We are going much, much deeper in understanding how we can do this. Because first, just a quick, let's say, analogy or example here. Think of, people as a whole as, envision a shopping mall, a really big shopping mall with lots and lots of different stores. And let's say those stores represent various different interests that, people have, whether it be clothes or candles or, I don't know, shoes, you name it. There's lots of different things that we have an interest for in a mall. But with my example I led in with just now, the way I see it is most of the time, us as an industry, see players as, okay, they just shop at GameStop. That's it. GameStop, serves the majority of all their needs, everything from gaming preferences all the way down to, why grocery shop, we got, treats, snacks, all that stuff. Okay, I'm over embellishing here, exaggerating, but the point is we kind of see it as that way. Like, hey, players are only doing this, so therefore we're just going to target, people who are at GameStop, right? But fine, it's targeted, but it's not necessarily addressing the problem that I'm seeing is we're not treating players as people. So why is this important? Well, honestly, it's because the industry's current approach just makes it hard to stand out. I mean, think about it. If we're all thinking the same way, whether it's AAA or indies, we're all thinking, hey, players do nothing but shop at GameStop, and everybody's targeting GameStop. Again, this is like just a very broad example here, but if everybody's doing the same thing, how are we going to stand out? It's going to make it pretty difficult, right? If we're all taking the same approach, it's going to be difficult to stand out. And there's other problems that can come out of this too. Because if we're reducing players to their characteristics and behaviors and all this other data points and just looking at the data of who these people are, of their actions and how those actions are attributed to, things that are going on when they play games, it can be very problematic. And I think a classic example here is what happens sometimes with live ops. They're nothing against them, but sometimes a lot of those decisions are based off of behaviors of player behaviors and how they purchase items and things like that and skins and all that stuff. And then they solely focus on that to the point where we hear all these stories, even with big IPs, big studios, AAA level stuff that come out with this focus because they have all the data to back it. But then players are like, why are you guys trying to hose me down for every dime that I have? I don't like this. We are all familiar with this. And it's not good. It's not good and it's not good both ways. The players don't like it. And in the end, these studios, even the big IPs and big brands and AAA guys don't benefit from it either. So what's the solution here? Honestly, it just comes down to thinking different, going beyond this idea of, hey, we got this data. We got to just look at players as these data points. No, we got to go beyond that. We got to look at players a bit differently. So, how are we going to do that? Well, there's a few ways we're going to tackle this first. One is we're going to identify some problems. We're going to look at kind of what, is more likely than not the root cause of this big problem. And then we're also going to look at the symptoms, because that's an important one, because a lot of times, symptoms can vary, right? They not only vary, but they can't always be attributed to the same thing. So we want to break these things down so we can further understand them. All right, so let's start with the problems. Well, the problems can range quite a bit. I have a short list. It could be everything from just like limited effort that we're making for whatever the reason. It's okay, but limited effort. Generic messaging, like emulating what others are doing, not having a meaningful connection, and just relying on standard marketing tactics. And what this all really boils down to is just that the messaging is not meaningful. And what I mean by that specifically is that it equates to just having a lack of empathy. Now, I am not saying that studios and developers aren't empathetic. I am not saying that in the least bit. And in fact, there's other things that are going on that I think is really cool, and that I see a lot of people doing very well, a lot of studios, a lot of developers, and even those that might struggle with it a little bit now. It's something that can be picked up and done really well, which is our ability to excite players. And that could be anything from, making announcements and trailers and revealing this type of stuff, which can definitely excite players. And a lot of us can be very good at it. It might not happen immediately, but we can. We have that ability. I've seen it across the board, and we know how to do it. There's lots of information on that. But here's another thing about this that I see all the time that relates to the problem that I'm talking about a little bit in terms of empathy. Here's some quick examples. Like, I see people, whether it's making social media posts or maybe how they approach an influencer. It could be like, hey, we're making a creepy Souls-like Metroidvania. Okay. And some cool imagery, video clips, whatever to go with it. Or it could be posts or communications that are along the line like, hey, I wanted to see a game that would do this. And, something, I wanted to make a game I enjoyed. And I wanted to make this playable demo featuring these things. And I think you might start seeing the connection here. And I'm not saying people who make posts like this or anything like similar to this are doing anything wrong. Again, it's more of leading with that purpose and intention of, hey, we got to create excitement and awareness. Got it. But what I am saying here, because today we're talking about going deeper, folks. What I am saying here is when we're communicating to players and others this way, it comes down to where it's usually about you and not them. And again, there's nothing wrong with this, and it's not our intention to do so, but usually that's what happens. And here's a quick example to kind of convey what I'm talking about here is, have you ever been to a social gathering or a networking event or a conference, and you're in this atmosphere where there's this one person in this group that's really dominating the conversation? That can be hard to break through that, to try to not necessarily talk about yourself or whatever, or just even try to be part of that conversation. And I mean, look, I consider myself an extrovert, and I've seen myself in situations like that a lot of time, and it's challenging to break through, to be part, to be involved in that conversation, especially if it's people I don't know. But if we're folks that consider ourselves extroverts, well, that's just even more challenging, right? So, and with taking that scenario in mind, and how a lot of us may communicate our games and to players and others, and how we excite people, if we're only focusing on using terms that showcase that it's all about us and not them, think of, again, be empathetic. What was that doing to players? It's not like scaring them off, and it's a very different scenario than the one I provide an example for, but it could leave that impression. There is that possibility where, hey, we're creating friction for them. It's all about them. Okay, cool, this is exciting, but in the back of their mind, what else? Like, what else could be done to cater to their interests? There's lots there, right? So when that happens, we can start and we think this way, we can start better understanding the root cause of some of the problems we're seeing. And these can come down to a few things like, hey, look, we're just neglecting player motivations. We may be failing to understand player values. We're not making personal connections, and we're not aligning game themes with their interests. And if we start looking at things that way, we start getting a better picture of stuff. And again, I'm not saying it's our intention to do this. There's a lot of reasons, and one is we just might not know. So we're going to find out how to know. But if we see this as potentially being the root cause, it honestly provides a little bit more clarity about why we might be seeing some of these symptoms. And these symptoms could be anything from, again, very quick examples here, but like an ad spend with low return on investment, ROI, low wish list conversion rates, limited organic growth or little to no word of mouth. That's, something we're all going for. Minimal response to influencer campaigns and little social media engagement or community participation. And these are just some, right? And I want to be very clear here. Symptoms can't always be completely attributed to this root cause or any other root cause. So we got to be mindful of that. But I think if we look at things from different perspectives, especially this one, we can now start to see where these symptoms could be from that as opposed to other beliefs we may have. And even if you can, prove it with other data and things like that, it might not paint the whole picture. So by being a little bit more minded, looking at things this way, we can help kind of, to a degree, attribute some of these symptoms. And the reason why this is important too, because let's say, if we see some of these symptoms, which, let's say, essentially we can throw more stuff at this, right? Oh, if I'm not getting the best ROI, maybe my budget needs to be increased on my ad spend. Sure. Or maybe I need to do more because I'm not posting enough. Okay, so where our organic growth is limited because we need to do more to get more data and then just keep pumping that machine. And I mean, I don't know, I'm just saying it right now. It sounds a little tiring, but hey, that's probably the mentality some of us have is, because look, a lot of us don't do as much as we probably could, right? We're limited on resources and time. I get it. But here's the thing, doing more doesn't guarantee results. And that's why it's so important to understand what the potential root cause is and why looking at things this way can be a little bit more revealing in terms of why other things are happening or aren't going the way you want. So again, doing more doesn't guarantee results. And why is that important? Because I don't know, a quick example is like, hey, for those of you who are familiar with, whoever played Dr. Mario, you can't just pop pills in that bottle and hope that you're going to destroy all the germs, right? There's got to be a method. There's got to be some intent. There's got to be a strategy going on in order for you to advance to the next level. Because if you don't, those germs are going to laugh at you. But it's not because it's funny. It's because you lost. I mean, maybe it's funny to them that you did. But yeah, this is just a game we're talking about here. But the reality of it is, if we're just throwing pills or parts or whatever at what we feel is the problem when they're really, the symptoms, if we're just doing that, it creates the potential for burnout. And that's a really real and harsh thing that all of us are facing. And whether we're concerned with it or not, it's one of those things that is kind of always looming over us. And we got to be mindful of that because, again, just doing more isn't necessarily the answer. So what is the potential answer here? Well, again, for why we're here today and diving deeper, I strongly believe that it's coming down to a factor like we got to treat players like people. And what that exactly equates to is we got to have an empathetic intent. We got to lead with empathy. And to do that, there's lots of ways we can dive in. So again, let's go back to that example I shared with you before, the shopping mall versus the GameStop storefront. Well, we're no longer, at least temporarily here, going to look at GameStop anymore. I mean, it's still important, still something to consider, but what we want to do is we want to see players as not just gamers. No, we want to see them as individuals. So now we're going to dive into how we're going to do that. How are we going to have that shopping mall mentality of like, hey, we know these people do a lot of different things. And if we can cater to those different things and a game experience that we love and they love, boom. That's going to be the ticket, or at least the right direction. All right. And why is that the right direction? Well, there's a few things. Notice how I just said if we can kind of connect things better, if we know their interests and know what our interests are as a developer or as a studio, because a lot of us that goes into the games. I mean, sorry, a lot of like our individual characteristics is going into games, right? Our passion, our drives, our influences, like all these elements are going into what we're creating here, right? But then we don't take it a step further to have that mall, that mall visual, that mall mentality of like, hey, players have a lot of different things too. So what I'm talking about here is alignment, and this is how we can connect the dots. And just a quick example, analogy here. I mean, think of a car, right? Hey, if your car is out of whack alignment, tires are going every which direction, well, one, it could be not safe, right? But more likely than not, you're going to get to your destination. But are you going to get there easier? Are you going to feel a little bit more comfortable or relaxed if you know that your car's not wobbling? Like if you're driving like 50, 100 miles to wherever you're going, yeah, it's going to be better. And there's still going to be detours. There's still going to be obstacles and all these other things. So knowing that you have this direction in mind and that ride is going to be smooth makes all the difference. That's why alignment's so important. And if you can connect those dots from your vision to what the game has to then the player's interest and aligning all those things together, it makes it a little bit smoother ride. It gives you a clear direction. So how do we start with this? It starts with getting your market segment. And what is a market segment? Well, it's no different than things that we're already familiar with, like market research and all that stuff, getting game comparisons, all that stuff. But here's the thing. We look at this, I think, in a way that's too broad. It's specifically too objective. So what I'm calling out here is a lot of the type of market research, market analysis I've seen is we're taking the game, primarily the game mechanics, and there's some other things too we dive in a little bit deeper with, but we take primarily the game mechanics and we start lining those up with, okay, these are the potential, market segment or the market we're targeting. And then we may take the most popular ones and then we use this information in various ways. It could be for a pitch deck and say, hey, look, here are 4 titles that did really well that are totally in our market, and this is our earning potential and kind of viability because of this, right? Very objective, very dialed in and focused in that sense, right? But there's a lot of other things that are going on. And what I mean by that is without thinking about players differently and empathetically, we're really only catering to essentially a genre and maybe some specific mechanics with that genre. And then sometimes what we do, we might say, oh, for market opportunities, we're like, oh, look, there's this genre, and this genre is commonly used in what we're targeting here, but this genre, or I'm sorry, not just 2 genres, mechanics. Let me swap out for a minute. We're taking this mechanic and this mechanic that's typically seen in the genre. Great, that's very common. But you know what? Let's take this mechanic and this one that hasn't been used, and we might have a market opportunity there, right? So we look at things very objectively. And again, there's nothing wrong with this approach. But what we're not necessarily doing is looking at things in a more subjective way. And what I mean by this specifically is calling out to things that games that, yes, have done well. Let's say well in terms of some form of commercial success. Looking at those games, but also making sure that we're aligning them or they're as similar as possible to the project or the game that we're working on, and not focusing on just the biggest and broader ones. Because what happens if we're looking at the biggest and broadest ones and that are only dialed in and focused on, let's say, the mechanics, again, that's important. But if we're only looking at those things, it's not going to give us the insight or information that we need to better dial into our audience, to dial into the market, to then get to a position where we can learn more about them. So being objective is important, but looking at things a little bit more subjectively, like the themes of the game, the art style, how is it very different? Even getting into the emotions. What are the memorable moments of these games? What kind of emotions do they convey? What are the general vibes of your game? And how does it relate to other games that are doing something very similar to that? Even if they're a little bit outside of the realm, let's say the mechanic is a little bit different than what you're really honing in on, that's okay. It's a process that you really want to nail down and get to that the subjective elements, those vibes, those feelings and everything, because those are the things that are going to allow us to then dig in deeper with and then connect and resonate with players. And for anybody's questioning, like, oh, well, how many titles do I go through this? Honestly, I would say if you can get about 5, that's going to be a good position. You don't need a ton of them. You might have to like narrow down from a big list down to that 5, but ultimately, you just need a few. You don't need to go crazy with that. All right, so we got our market segment. We're looking at this a little bit broader, but also dialed in. It's like exclusion through inclusion, if you will. And again, and the whole purpose of this is primarily just to look at things from a player perspective, which means we need to have these other elements and stuff that are better incorporating player behaviors. I'm sorry, player interest or individualistic characteristics. Lots of fun words there. But once we do that, what this does is get us to a much closer place with our core audience, our ideal players. It's so important that we get to this point. And again, I can't call out or emphasize enough. That's why it's important to look at things a little bit more subjectively so we can get to these players, so we can get deeper and connect and resonate with them. So once we have that market segment, once we have a better sense of our core audience in terms of from the market perspective, now we need to dive deeper by just doing one thing. Listen. Hey everyone, I just wanted to take a brief moment to say if what I've shared so far resonates with you, but you're still wondering how to really understand your audience and what steps to take to stand out and connect with them, well, I'm here to make that simple. Again, my audience insight reports break down every key aspect of your audience so you can stop guessing and start generating more results and stronger relationships with your players. So whenever you're ready, just head over to rengenmarketing.com or check out the link in the show notes to learn more. And thanks again for listening. And what do I mean by listening? Basically, it comes down to, hearing what people are talking about, but beyond games. I can't emphasize this enough. Beyond games. And what I mean by that, we take our list, for example, and we look at what conversations people are having in various communities, starting with the games, right? So whatever that title is, that list of 5 games you came up with, we want to see what people are talking about that first. But we're not looking at what they're saying about the games. No. What we're really looking at are other cues, other indicators that give us more insight to them as individuals, as a group of individuals. And we're going to be looking for things like values, entertainment, hobbies, activities, culture. Like, there's so much we can dive into. But we got to do it by looking beyond games, because if we're only focusing on the games part and what they're saying about this game and that game and not looking at it through this more individualistic lens, we run into the problem of doing what I led in from the beginning of this conversation, which is we're only reducing players to their behavior characteristics, in-game characteristics, and then we'll just fall right back into that trap again, and we can't if we really want to dive deeper and resonate with them. So again, just clearly to emphasize the point, we need to go to infinity and beyond games, and because that's the only way we're really going to connect and resonate with these players. So how do we do this? Sounds like, Andrew, you're asking us to do a lot of crazy research that maybe you're really familiar with and we're not. I get it. Makes sense. Well, honestly, there are simple, quick ways to do this. And you know what? These are just really good thought exercises when I'm going to start leading in with you at this point now. So first off, where are these communities? Where do these conversations happen? How does this all work? Yeah, it can get a little detailed, but it's pretty simple. One of the places that I think is most effective is Reddit. Whether you use Reddit regularly or never use it. Any one of you that fits in that range can do this. And what it comes down to first, you take those games, those comparisons I told you about, and then you start looking at what people are commenting on, just a few to start. And then there are so many cool free tools out there. One in particular, I think if you just Google Reddit Analyzer tool, you could take that, pop in a username from Reddit, and then you can see where they're most active, what communities they have posted in, what communities they commented in. And ultimately, what we're looking for is what places are they most engaged with? What places are they talking the most or making more posts, contributing to those communities that they, because clearly it shows intent, it shows that they care about these things if they're actively posting regularly in these places. So when we do that, when we plug this information into these, this analyzer tool I mentioned, again, just Google it, Reddit user analyzer tool, find a username, plug it in. It's even really cool to use yourself. I've done this numerous times, and I look at it as, as objectively as possible and pulling myself back to what I know about myself. And when I see the behavior, I'm like, oh, wow, that lines up. That's totally me, even though an outsider would not know me personally or anything like that. But yeah, it's fun. So if you have a Reddit profile, do that with yourself too and see if you can kind of connect the dots there. But for this case, with what we're doing for people, we plug that information in, we see where they're actively engaged, and then we start connecting the dots. And first, let's say, I have some examples here. I'm just going to say without the visuals, but let's say we plug this person, a random person in, and oh, wow, one of the top popular communities they're involved in is cozy gamers. Okay, cool. Makes sense. Because in this example, I think how I got this random user was through looking up people who commented or talked about clan folk. All right. So this person's into cozy games. All right, makes sense. But they're into like Tiny Tower. Oh, Grim Dawn. All right. Borderlands. So, all right, there's some, interesting types of RPGs, and we got like first persons now. Oh, there's an action RPG community post, Steam. You get the picture. These are all the game related ones that we see. But let's look at it a step further. Let's go deeper. One of the things that come up are gaming suggestions. Another one is, should I buy this game? And these are very top. They're very involved in these places. And what was this telling us? That could be anything from they value their time. They don't have quite an expendable income, so that they value that too. And those two things are important because it's showing like behavioral characteristics of this individual. Why do they care about these things so much, and why are they so active there? It's because of probably those two things. Or maybe they're a person in there too, providing insight, providing advice, providing like more value because they care about, that's something they care about. And they're like, hey, if I ever got a bad recommendation, that could waste time and money for me. So I want to help someone else because that's how if that happened to me, I'd feel bad. So I want to do my best to help others. So it could even mean like community involvement, things like that. So there's a quick kind of a snapshot of giving us ideas of, okay, what else are these players like? Or at least this individual. Then we could go deeper. We could see, oh, they're involved in talk about fantasy, and they talk about Stephen King and book suggestions. And now it's like, okay, there's not too much here, but okay, there's maybe some dark things. Fantasy specifically does do a lot of focus, I believe, with lots of people talking about books, among lots of other things too. Stephen King, horror writer, book suggestions. That's clearly something about with books. But we now see that there could be some dark themes here, and then maybe that aligns a little bit better with Grim Dawn. Okay, right. So we're starting to connect some very interesting dots here. And again, this is just one user we're talking about. We'll get back to this in a moment. Look further. Oh, they're into football, specifically soccer in this case. So maybe not just they're like sports, but maybe they're a little competitive. Maybe like in nature and how they feel passionate about these things, right? Like lots of other information here. We could look at other things too. There's a lot of posts that they made about in Ohio, in Columbus specifically too. Two different communities. So that it can mean, all right, not just demographic information, but maybe they have someone that lived there. Maybe they're from there. Maybe because of what's going on in that state or various other things, it's showing that they're actively involved or maybe have a stake in because it's their community or they want to contribute to their community or complain. I don't know, but it's showing that they care about that stuff. And across the board, we see all these little things. Pokemon, that's entertainment. Anti-work, that's cultural related. Reactive dogs, pets, news. They trust various sources, and getting it from these places and others are important. Again, this is all painting the picture of this individual in terms of who they are, what are their individual characteristics. And on top of that, it starts becoming a little bit more clear in what they do. Yes, gaming is going to be an important thing. That was like the top thing, like everything that I called out to at first was all about gaming. But look, regional stuff, Columbus, Ohio, that was pretty high for them in terms of, you know, what could be an important factor for them. But we do these things. We take some of this information of, let's say, even a small group of these players that are commenting on these games on your market segment that list a few titles that you came up with that are as close to your project as possible. And as we start grouping all these players together and these behaviors, we start seeing really cool things in terms of, oh, maybe they're really into technology. Maybe they're really into entertainment. Oh, they care so much about their pets, but news isn't such important, even though it seemed like it might have had. What we're doing is we're cross-referencing all these things, and now we're starting to see, based off of their interests, based off of their passions, and other communities that they're contributing to, we are getting a better sense of who this group, who this audience, who this market really is. And it could go even deeper if we find things that they're into really humorous types of communities or councils or work culture. Again, once we start getting this, and even if you're not mapping this out or putting a graph or all this other stuff you could do, because I get it, that takes a lot of time to do those things. But even if you're not, and you're taking a few minutes a day looking at players, what are they talking about outside, beyond games, we start to get a better picture of who they are. So now, when we look at that image again, that mall mindset, right? That mall visual, we're now basically looking at that, hey, look, this is their personal interests and behaviors, not just the game-related ones, which are the GameStop, storefront. And I'm not saying we don't do the GameStop way or approach of things. I'm not. But what I am saying, let's combine the two. But let's put a little bit more emphasis and focus on that mall mentality. That doesn't sound right, but we're sticking with it. The mall visual here, because at least it's going to now allow us to open up, to be more empathetic, and to really cater and target players in a more meaningful and impactful way. Because with all this information now, we can start making connections. We can now start to take the attributes from your game, from your project, and start, again, aligning them with player characteristics, specifically their individual characteristics. So we can take the themes, we can take all these cool things, and again, these are going to relate to probably your values, your interests, and other things, because part of what you're doing is in this game that you're creating with you, your team, whoever. And then now we have this understanding of who these players are, because we started with that source that is so close to this game. Now we can start making connections. And when we make connections, this is where the really cool, deep, and amazing results can happen. Quick example here is strange horticulture. Now, if you may can visualize this image, but if not, it's very heavy focus. You got these three characters in front. You got maps and you got plants and some other things there too. Obviously, these are all triggers or cues that represent the game. Does a great job of that. Well, what these guys did was really cool. And it wasn't just the developers, it was the publisher too. But they knew that there's some key elements here of the game, whether it's themes, characteristics, whatever. They took what they thought would be the coolest things, and let's, reach out to communities that care about this stuff too, even though it doesn't directly relate to the game, but we're catering to their interests. We're learning, we know these are core elements of the game, so why not align it with interests of people out there? So they went out, and I think they talked about their maps in communities that talked about maps. I think imaginary maps is a big one, and others. Pets was another big factor and component of the game. So, maybe not necessarily reaching out to pet communities, but talking about pets, knowing that the audience really liked that, and that was a characteristic they knew would align with their audience, their market. They also did plants. Obviously, that's a big one. Strange horticulture, because you're making all these concoctions and stuff with plants and stuff. And what was really cool in the center of this, and this is kind of a paraphrase quote from the publisher, that this is why they were doing these things too. They said we wanted to make sure we reached people who would get the beauty of strange horticulture, not throw stuff at every proverbial wall and see what's stuck. See, they wanted to reach out to people who got the game. They didn't want everybody else. They wanted those who got the game. And who's that? That's your core audience. And that's what they led with. And when they led with that way, they even said, and this is coming from an article by Simon Carless, Game Discover Co., where he interviewed, and this is where I'm sourcing this paraphrase quote here, and they said that attributed to a big significant factor in their strategy and why their marketing strategy was effective. And what's really cool from that approach and everything, because of those efforts and because of catering to these other communities, guess what? It started to resonate with other communities too, forming a word of mouth engagement where they were sharing some of these plants and stuff, and there was some DMs, dungeon masters, the D&D community, they picked up on this like, oh, that's a cool plant name. I'm going to include this in my games now. And next thing you know, they shared maps too, and they're also looking for maps and all these other things, and it's very inspiring, and it's giving, and you can see how this is now fueling and growing, kind of like a big, huge wisteria plant taking over everything, simply because they were leading with intent. They were leading with empathy and doing what they thought they could align with their players' interests, but also based off of the elements and themes and other aspects of the game. Some other quick example here is, Chill Aquarium. One thing that the developer here did was they reached out to a community, not just the aquarium community, but they knew or had, I believe they knew or had some sense that, hey, there's a lot of underrepresented communities, like sub-communities, that don't get all the attention. And for lack of a better dad joke here, but they essentially reached out to the bottom feeders of the aquarium community, which are shrimp tank owners. And, they did. And what did they do? He just reached out and said, hey, look, I'm making this aquarium, simulation game, cute thing, fun. It's like a, 2D pixel art. And, what kind of shrimp would you love in this game? Or should I consider? And you know what? They loved it, because think about it. Like, I don't know the specifics here, but I would imagine some shrimp are harder to maintain or have and care for than others. So maybe these people are like, oh, this would be really cool if you could do this one, because I've always wanted this shrimp, but at least vicariously I can live through your your simulation. I'm just giving scenarios here, but the point is, here's an audience, here's a community that is underserved, and what do? They go out and they start serving that particular community. And again, this helped get more awareness. This helped attract players. It showed them that, hey, look, I'm out here doing this for you because I get you. And when you lead with that mindset and mentality, it's mutually beneficial. So, talked a lot about stuff that probably, maybe more so than not, relates to social media posting. Okay, well, what else? What else could this approach, this understanding, diving deep into understanding our audience more, what else can this do? Well, what else is it can really expand our horizons, because what we can do with this is start expanding the approach. So we have this approach, treating players like people, right? But let's expand it further, specifically using the empathetic intent. And what I mean by this is empathetic intent is just another way of saying, hey, let's make some more meaningful communication. And when we start leading with this idea of what's more meaningful communication, now we can start applying this to so many different tactics that are used or things that we're using when we're marketing our games. And some quick examples here are, Hades. I love it because I'm sure most of you can think of what that image looks like right now. But if you go to their page, unless they've changed this recently, I don't think so. Their description is dead on in terms of really setting expectations. They know who they're targeting, making it very clear what you're going to get just from the description alone. The art, it's very consistent with what's in game. The Hades, logo has slashes in it, dashes. It's very, very symbolic of the experience is going to be like in game. There's one. Another one is Kit Fox Games with Boyfriend Dungeon with their email campaign. I mean, I believe this all started from their Kickstarter, but what they were doing is, these emails are going out that are like love letters, right, to the audience and things like that. So it's creating a very immersive experience that it's aligning with the game completely and providing lots more value in a very different and creative way. They're not just looking at, what's the open rate for this? And I'm sure they probably still are, but they're leading at least with an empathetic intent. So it's really creating an experience that's going to relate to that in-game experience too. So they're expanding the approach to all sorts of like tactics and other methods. Another one for like even paid advertising. This one-man studio, solo developer that, hey, he ran some Facebook ads. And the goal of this was just to like, hey, build up the community, specifically the email list. And with those Facebook ads, there's various images used. And also he knew he had some type of following that were like fans of his artwork. So he knew the artwork was a big driver of his audience. So he catered really well to them by providing all this cool imagery, using an ad format that allowed people to kind of go in. Oh, and the game is called Rabbit Hole. So he used the ad format that kind of guided people on a quick little journey, kind of like going down a rabbit hole, like, I'm scrolling through this image, this text, okay, this messaging. Oh, now I can dive deeper, and it's like taunting me, like, dare to follow the rabbit. All right. They go to a landing page, and that landing page had some animation where you're scrolling down, seeing all the different features, the USPs about the game, and it keeps going down this hole as you scroll down, and at the bottom, what is there? An art book for people. If they sign up, they get this cool digital art book. And yes, digital art books aren't necessarily a big thing or do too well, but because there was a lot of information and he knew that the audience really, really resonated with the art, well, why not feed into that? And that's like a perfect opportunity. And that thing did really well too. So look, we can expand this approach. We can do it in lots of different ways. But wait, because there's more, because this approach does more than just give us insight and how to communicate with people on a deeper level and how it can inform how we do things with the tactics and other strategies that we're using. But, if we're taking this empathetic intent, it can also create more opportunities and more opportunities with everything from publishers, press, influencers, and even collaborations. So many different things that we can do there. Because look, if we are empathetic of publishers' needs, for example, we're going to better understand hey, what are they looking for? What is their portfolio like? How can I position myself in a way that I make it appear to them as a no-brainer for them to fund my project? And when we're looking at things this way, not only can we use the information we gathered about our players and use that as a means to start generating results, getting more attention and all these other things, but so we have that to show to the publishers, but we can also, if we lead with empathy and know what their needs are and how we can address their needs, we're going to be better positioned when we pitch to them. Or let's say the same thing with influencers. If we know who their audience is and we can find really interesting and meaningful ways to connect, the game we're working on and why these are cool elements, even if it's just a short pitch, but you can kind of show and convey this to these influencers and understand their needs and saying like, look, I don't want you just to cover my game. I want to maybe not directly saying this to them, but if you understand of their audience needs, their needs, and if you can align those things with what you're providing with your game, that's more likely than not a way for them to engage with you. Personalization is something you can talk about with influencers. And yes, sometimes, having a network makes it all the big of a difference in those connections, but still, these are all things that we can take this approach and apply to everything else that we do. Because if we're leading with empathy and we know what these people need and we can provide that for them, but that's mutually beneficial, it just puts us in a better position and how we can attract and get more for our games, get more results, doing things what we are focusing on and want to have happen. And because you know what? Knowing this stuff is really half the battle. I'm not saying it's going to answer all the problems you have or answer everything, but the more you know, the better off you're going to have clarity and direction and everything else. And as I said on G.I. Joe, right? Knowing is half the battle. So to kind of go back to my point before about doing more doesn't guarantee results, but knowing more helps get better results. And thinking about the more we know, the more we can dial in, the more we can do those types of things instead of just doing more is what's going to help us get better results. And the reason for this is because it provides clarity and it gives us clear direction. And when we have clarity and direction, it just makes things a lot simpler. Again, think about the analogy with the car and the alignment. If it's out of whack, it's not going to be as simple. And again, I use simple and not easy because easy makes it sound like, oh, no problem. No, simple can still be complicated and hard and everything else, but at least it gives you a clarity and direction. And what else it does is, by knowing more, is we can establish more than just transactional relationships with players. Because when we're focusing on those characteristics, those data points and everything to influencing how we use our monetization strategy, or if we're just always calling out me, or I did this, or saying, hey, look, just wish list my game all the time, and being that's kind of like a hopeful strategy in a way. And again, we can be good at exciting and all these things, but we want this approach allows us to establish a meaningful relationship. Not one just based off its transactions. Yes, we need transactions at the end of the day, of course. But if you're leading with empathy, if you're leading with a meaningful relationship as part of your goal, that's more likely to happen. That's more likely to get what you're looking to achieve. Because when you're creating these relationships, you're creating them with meaning and purpose. And the coolest thing about that, and look at as developers, as passionate as we are with our games and everything else, why wouldn't we then want to create these relationships? Why wouldn't we want to do so with meaning and purpose? Right? I mean, I think that's one of the most rewarding things we can do outside of obviously, a commercial success. This would be so rewarding. And the really important thing here is if we're doing those things, if we're creating meaning and purpose for people, I honestly can't think of something that's more impactful and rewarding than doing that for people, because that just means so much if you're actually giving someone meaning and purpose with the work that you're creating. So that is the episode for today, how to resonate with your audience and get remarkable results. And again, it's just all important stuff we need to think about, we need to consider, we need to ask ourselves these questions. Because if we don't, and we could just continue to do the same as everybody else is, again, it's just going to be really challenging to stand out. And yeah, let's just do it. Let's just start treating players like people. And it's not going to happen overnight. But if you lead with that intent, if you have an open mind and lead with empathy, there's no reason why you can't do this. Thank you so much for bearing with me in this one. I hope you appreciated it. If you did, or have thoughts or comments, or just want to chat, reach out. Andrew at RenGen Marketing is one way. I'm on Discord. Lots of ways to connect. Website, RenGen Marketing. You should know the drill. But again, if you're interested, and again, just can't thank all of you for, being listeners and chiming in and everything else and doing what you do to spread the word about this podcast. So that's all I got for today, folks. Thanks again. Appreciate you. And now, go out there and lead with empathy. Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.